Me, a bro.
Yep.
He, a dude.
That's good stuff. All right. Let's try it. Okay. Welcome to the We Will Journey podcast. We're talking about faith and life as it happens, and not the glossy exterior we wish it was. What, man? What did I do wrong?
I think you said it's because all the things I was thinking about before. But we can edit that. You got that part good.
Oh.
You got it good. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Okay, just...
Now it's your turn.
Good?
Yeah.
Wait. We're going to get under the surface. I should have said all those things before. We should have waited down and dirty until after we read this part.
Okay.
Okay. Wait. We get under the surface and explore the down and dirty. Okay. Maybe we should. It doesn't have to be word for word, right?
No. I mean, I gave an interpretation.
Okay. All right. We get under the surface and explore the down and dirty of life as it pertains to our beliefs, our relationships, politics, and absolutely everything else.
Oh, there we go. That was good. All right.
When I'm dead, laying in my coffin, all my friends all gather round. They can say I'm just sleeping, good Lord, the sweet peace I have found.
3, 2, 1.
Well, hello, Seth.
Hello, Tyler. How are you this? How are you this wonderful day?
I'm good. We're getting off to like a really great start, aren't we?
Yeah.
With making some sort of attempt to record our conversation. So today's kind of fun because I had a interview with Jane Gillman, who does the music for our podcast, and so that was pretty cool. But you and I are going to talk for a few minutes here.
Yes, we are.
You threw out the idea of movies, music, sermons. Did you have something or another on that list?
Yeah, I think I said sports and leisure, politics, current
leisure,
events,
politics, current events,
newspaper clippings, magazines. Favorite mountains to go hiking on.
Wow, I like that one. Favorite mountains to go hiking on. What's your favorite mountain to go hiking on, Seth?
Oh man, I mean, it's that's a hard one. Part of the problem is I don't know the name of a lot of the the names of a lot of the mountains. It's just it's not a huge part of my life as far as let's just put it this way. I haven't yet studied all of the mountains. I will say the Nordkette here, it's like the northern chain that I can kind of see from our side window on our balcony. I've been up in that range a lot, and I really like that because once you get up there, even just a little ways, then you get a nice view of Innsbruck. Really cool view of Innsbruck, and I am partial to that side. I've been to on the other side too, and you get another cool view, but it's a bit different. So I think the northern chain of mountains, north of Innsbruck, top notch.
What was the mountain that we hiked up with the sleds to come? That we sled, we rode sleds down. What mountain was that?
That was part of the northern chain somewhere. I think that was above Rum. Was that close to? Was that like? Did we meet up with Dave? Right.
We met up with a man. I don't remember his name.
We met up with a strange man, and he led us up into the woods.
It wasn't Dave. It was some other guy.
No,
that
I'm pretty sure.
He had, a wife and children, but I don't think it was Dave. He was like a skinnier guy. Skinnier than Dave.
What are you trying to say?
Dave's like a big dude.
He is.
Like,
he is solid muscle and Viking strength.
He is. He has solid muscle and Viking strength.
I'm pretty sure it was him, though, and I'm pretty sure I have photos on my computer.
Who is that other family that we met up with? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I guess this conversation it doesn't make for good podcasting. I apologize. I apologize to our listeners.
Well, you did send me a list earlier of what does make for good podcasting, and we haven't accomplished that either. So I mean, we're kind of in.
It was like
no man's land.
It was a top 10 list. Actually, hey, we should read through that. That was interesting. Let me pull that up really quick.
Please do.
Yeah, because I thought that was kind of an interesting little list. So it says 10 ways to build a ministry platform. I'll start with like David Letterman did, number 10. Of course, his were funny. But anyways,
these are kind of funny too, though. Actually, to be honest,
they're kind of funny. Make one thing everything. So that's number 10. And then number 9 is to downplay judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And then number 8 is to chase a fad.
Mm-hmm.
Number 7 is sell your charisma. We don't have to worry about that. Number 6, stoke division. Okay.
What are you trying
Number
to say?
5 is to stir up fear.
Mm-hmm.
And then number 4 is to nitpick others.
Mm-hmm.
And then number 3, claim special insight. Number 2, major on a minor. Number 1, sentimental. Oh boy, I messed up the word. Sentimentalize truth. And the guy that put this is at Gunnar Gunderson on Twitter. Gunnar Gunderson. What a great name. Anyways, yeah.
Gunnar Gunderson. That is a name that is definitely real. That's a real name.
Yeah, that's a real name. That's not made up.
It's not something made up.
It's a real deal.
But
wow, what is this?
I don't know. I was looking at pictures of our time here, and I saw this. It's so what? We'll edit that out. We'll edit that out.
Are you? Oh, okay.
We can edit that out. I really I have it somehow saved on my computer, and it made me smile once again. What I meant to show you was a different picture.
Oh, you're showing. Okay.
I was gonna show you a picture of when you were here. This picture that I was gonna share with. Oh yeah, this one right here. No, not this one, but here's another one. This makes for a horrible
podcasting at its finest. We're literally looking at pictures. Yeah, we're looking at pictures that nobody else will be able to see.
Oh man.
So this is good.
This is all stuff we can edit out. This is also somebody, my friend David. He sent this picture to.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Good
funny.
Good times. We'll skip over that.
Mm-hmm.
What were you saying? No,
I don't know.
I don't know
what I was saying. I've totally lost. We were talking about Gunnar Gunderson.
Gunnar Gunderson, definitely.
His top 10 list.
He's profound. When he says something, it is good to listen.
It is good to listen to Gunnar. So, anyways, but yeah, so the guy that actually tweeted that was somebody whose name I'm not remembering right now, but he's from the Holy Post. Sky This guy, is it gosh.
We'll just edit this out too. That's fine. We'll just
as
long as
terrible.
we get 10 minutes.
It's Sky from the Holy Post. Anyways, he's a great dude. He retweeted that and basically said that, their podcast, they don't do this. That's probably why it's taken them 9 years to build up kind of a base of listeners. And do you feel like we do any of these things, Seth? Do you feel like we I don't feel like we sentimentalize, boy, I'm having a hard time with that word, truth. Mm-hmm. We don't major on a minor. Mm-hmm. We don't claim special insight, I don't think. Do we nitpick others?
I mean, you do, obviously. I don't do that.
I nitpick others. Do we stir up fear?
I nitpick my nose sometimes but that's different.
That's a different thing. I don't feel like we stoke division.
We try not to. I mean, the thing with division sometimes is, though, like, people also choose to be perturbed and let things divide them. Sometimes it's also, there's stoking division, but then there's also things that you say that maybe will be a little bit provocative that might... I don't think we're stoking division. I think there's people that disagree with some of our opinions. I guess that's what my point is.
You think people probably disagree with us?
I think some people disagree with us.
You think some people disagree with us? Okay.
You think everyone agrees with everything we say, or?
No, I don't think that. I definitely don't think that. I've been reading a book. Where is it? It's called Too Christian, Too Pagan. Have you ever heard of that book?
No. Is it like too legit to quit?
Yeah, something like that. I feel like you're tracking there. So it's by Dick Staub, called Too Christian, Too Pagan. And he talks about the fact that as a disciple of Christ, that essentially we will be too Christian for the secular world and too pagan for the Christian world. It's kind of an interesting read. I'm about halfway through it. I may have to reread the whole thing by the time I pick it up again, because I'm in the midst of some other reading that I'm trying to give my time to. But it's an interesting thought, isn't it, Seth, that if we're truly following after God's heart and chasing his heart for the world, that many will find us either too Christian or too worldly. And it kind of creates this weird thing where, like, culturally speaking, we may not really have like a home. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Where, we just don't really fit in anywhere. And that, I think that's like a scary place to get to. Because I think one of our key things is just human beings is we want to feel like accepted and we want to fit in somewhere. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so to intentionally walk down a path where you may not experience that is kind of scary.
I think it's, I would hope that we get closer and closer to that point, because I feel like that's where Jesus was. He was kind of in this zone of, he really loved everyone and was hanging out with people that were seen as being either outsiders, outcasts, the snobby, the whatever, a lot of people that were not liked or looked down on. But at the same time, he was then seen by other people as being too hard on certain things, right? Or too cut and dry, probably.
Yeah.
If that's the right.
Yeah.
the thing.
You know, I mean, at Jesus' crucifixion, he was rejected by everybody.
Yeah. And
including Peter. So even his own disciples essentially, you know, ran for the hills.
I think so. So when you talk about that, when we talk about this, it comes to my mind. I think about, like, for Jesus, it would even, like, he had it even much harder in a sense. Like, he didn't have a wife and kids that were kind of, at least, so the way I see it, my wife and kids are always going to be there, you know, for me. And, like, my wife, I say dumb things sometimes, or I do things that maybe some people would see, you know, like, okay, that's too much on this side or that side. But I feel like my wife is always going to love me and be there for me, right? And, like, he didn't even have that, you know?
Yeah.
Like, at the end of the day, like, he had people, I mean, obviously he had his father, his heavenly father, who he went to constantly for strength, and we have that too. But, like, he didn't have, like, a person beside him, because, like you said, like, even Peter, who would be probably, you know, maybe his closest friend, or one of his closest friends, there on earth, like, even he kind of betrayed him and left him at the end, at least temporarily, right? And so, like for us, that does, I mean, it is, it's one of the biggest blessings for me, at least, about being married, at least to the kind of, you know, the kind of woman I am, is I know, like, I have kind of that support base where sometimes I might say something, I might do something, and trust myself to go put myself out there a little bit, and knowing, like, okay, this might rub my Christian friends the wrong way, or if I do this might rub some of these people the wrong way because it's too Christian or whatever. And, like, at the end of the day, I know I have this person who's, like, there supporting me and kind of, like, helping me lick my wounds. In a sense.
This is off the subject, but it does relate to something you just said. Did you just say the kind of woman I am?
Have. The kind of woman that I have.
think. Oh, okay. The kind of woman you have. I think you said the kind of woman I am. So, anyways, that was going to take me down a whole nother path of conversation.
Well, I mean, now that we open the box, let's.
Well, anyways, I understood what you were saying, and that is very comforting to have people in our lives that do support us, kind of no matter what. Obviously, there are boundaries and lines we could probably cross that might jeoprize that.
But I guess my point is not like, yes, obviously, if I went and started sleeping around with a bunch of women, that would change that. Yeah. But Jesus wasn't doing those kind of things. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like if I'm trying to follow Christ and that ends up hurting a lot of my relationships on one side or the other, then like, I feel like my wife and my parents, literally, you know, they've been there for me in that kind of sense. And so that's kind of, that's something that I feel like I'm blessed in a sense, and I don't deserve to have that sort of thing. And really, rather than that should almost encourage me and push me forward even more so to be bold and some of the things that God has called me to do.
To take some risks. Even that can be difficult at times.
Obviously, you know,
it's difficult. There's times where we may feel called to challenge family, you know, and maybe it's our wife's family, right? And they're standing for something or saying things that just are definitely not true to Scripture. And you know, there's things like that all the time, right? That you just kind of overlook and don't worry about. But then there's probably times where, you know, it does create a situation maybe where we need to speak into it because it's just that bad. That can definitely put that spouse relationship into a difficult situation, where they feel like they have to choose sides, essentially. So that's a tough dynamic that sometimes couples get themselves into. But yeah, to be in a position where you just don't really have a group of people or even a person that you can actually feel comfortable or at home with, that would be really difficult, and I know Jesus really struggled with that, that scene that takes place before his arrest in the garden. The emotional turmoil that Jesus was in there was just extreme. And it talks about that, how extreme of a situation that was for Jesus in that moment. That's hard to relate to. I mean, thankfully, you or I don't think have been in that position. But to live out this calling at least opens the door for us to potentially be in that situation at some point in time, right?
Yeah, I definitely. I mean, I guess when that came to my mind, just thinking about like the support I have, or even our friendship, I don't think there's a lot of things I could do that would cause you to, like, I don't know, not be my friend anymore, to leave me completely. There's obviously things I could do, but like when we're talking about this, but at the same time, like, it also makes me think about all the times where, despite knowing I have some people, not only my Father God, not only I have the Holy Spirit guiding me, and He's a helper in those times, but I have a pretty good support system, and I have a wonderful family. Still, I fall short so many times, where I'm just like, I feel led to do something in this moment, and it might be something, for example, like going and talking to a certain person that you see, begging on the side of the road or something. And like, if I'm on my own by myself, then I won't even like think about those kind of things. But all of a sudden I'm with certain people, and all these thoughts come to me. Like I have this feeling like, hey, that person would love it if you just went over and said hi to them. Or maybe it's someone I've talked to before, and so I would just go check in on them. But I'm with this certain group of people. I feel all of a sudden like, oh, what are they going to think, of me if I go do this thing or whatever. And it's just like, what? Like, who cares? And I still fall, those kind of things. It's just a dumb little example, but like, I still am so worried about what people think about me, and if people like me.
Yeah. And we've never encountered a situation like, if I say, yes, Seth is my dear friend, I've never encountered a situation where by saying that would put my own life into jeopardy, right? So in that circumstance, would I claim you as my friend, or would I say, I don't know the dude, I don't know what you're talking about? You guys have a podcast together? I'd be like, no, that ain't me. I don't know what you're talking about.
That's Tyler Tyson.
That's different. He's a different guy. So, just being in that situation and being able to still say, oh yeah, that I run with that guy, and be willing to put your own life at risk. That's like a whole nother thing that you and I have never had to encounter, thankfully, and who knows, maybe someday we will have to make those kinds of decisions. But thankfully, up to this point in time, we have not had to do that. But anyway, so we're like at 20 minutes here, Seth, and we still have this interview with Jane to get to, so we probably should wrap it up. Any other final thoughts before we go to our interview? Or my interview with Jane?
I think it's kind of that was like a crazy little tangent we went on that brought up some good thoughts and and ideas. I don't know. I really enjoy having the opportunity. I know it sounds kind of weird, but I kind of like being in those situations where I'm forced to kind of step up. Enjoy maybe is the wrong word, but I like being challenged and put in a situation where someone says like, "Did you hear what Tyler said? Such a idiot." And then I can have that, and then I have that chance, to be like, "You're right, he is an idiot." Or I can step up, and
Yep.
and be like, "Well, why is he an idiot? What exactly?" And I don't always step up in those situations. Email. That's right, I said email. Seems like everybody's got one these days, even us. So if you want to get in contact with us or chat about the weather, you can shoot us an email at wewilljourney.connect@gmail.com. Look forward to hearing from you or reading from you.
Okay.
All right.
Good morning, Jane.
Good morning. How you doing?
So, I'm doing great. It's so cool that you were willing to just spend a little time talking this morning. We get to hear your voice on a regular basis every time we fire up one of our episodes, and I think you've become like the comfort food of our podcast. Like,
That's awesome.
Just hearing your voice is like a comforting thing. So.
Oh, that's really
So,
nice.
Jane, let's talk about how I found you real quick. I can't remember the name of the website. Is it Musician Finder?
It's actually Air Gigs.
Air Gigs. That's what it is. Okay. Air Gigs. Yeah. So I found you on Air Gigs, and I had a style in mind. Did I tell you the story? Kind of.
No, you
why
didn't, because that's always been a mystery to me, because I'm listed as a harmonica player and a dulcimer player. And you guys said, "Can you sing this song and play guitar?" So I always wondered, how did you even know I did that? And what made you ask for that instead of what I was listed for?
Well, I think maybe you have bluegrass or something associated with like your description, don't you? Is it like kind of folk or bluegrass?
Yeah, I probably do.
Yeah. That's what I probably was searching for. Was kind of that folk or bluegrass sound. So let me tell you a little bit about myself, and this will kind of help put it all together. So my day job, I'm a director of a little nonprofit here where we live, and we facilitate a senior center and public transit and some housing. And this guy used to come here and hunt pheasant, and he was from Florida, and his name was Frank, and he was friends with somebody that was involved in our senior center, and so they would always come up for coffee and just talk, and everybody got to know Frank really well in our community. And Frank was a picker and a singer and a harmonica player, and so Frank would come have lunch with us from time to time, and he would bring all of his stuff, and he would put on like a little concert for us. And so I've actually got a video of Frank playing and singing this song that you did for us. And Frank passed away from cancer kind of shortly before we started our podcast. And as we were talking about the idea of our podcast, I said, my friend Frank did the song, "I Am a Pilgrim." I think it'd be perfect for our podcast. And so I didn't have like a complete, song from Frank. So I wanted to find somebody that could kind of emulate a little bit of what he did. And man, Jane, when I found you, I was so stoked because you, especially your style of guitar, was so similar to what Frank really loved to do.
Really?
So,
That's amazing. That's a great
yeah.
story. I didn't know all that. That's really nice.
Yeah. So anyways, we really
And I like that he
appreciate.
was a harmonica player, too.
Yeah. He was so much fun.
Did he
We
play
loved
with a
having
rack?
Frank.
In other words, did he play his guitar and harmonica at the same time?
Yes, he did. Yep,
Awesome.
he did. Yeah.
That's what I did
Yeah,
for many
yeah.
years.
Yeah. Now, when we talked initially, you're like, I really don't want to sing, and yet on my albums, on my playlist that I have of yours, Jane, you always sang, right?
I did, but those albums are kind of from a long time ago at this point. And
Yeah,
these days
yeah.
I'm composing instrumental music for TV and film. And that's just
Okay.
a whole different thing. It's a whole different headspace. And I just haven't
Yeah.
performed as a singer-songwriter in a long time.
Yeah. Well, I think you did a great job.
Well,
so
thank you.
So
Thanks. I'm really glad
we're-
to contribute to that, especially knowing Frank's story. That's awesome.
Yeah. So tell me, how did you get started in all of this? I assume, that this was a passion when you were a child and it kind of grew into something, but talk about that a little bit.
Well, first of all, my father was a classical pianist, and so I grew up with music in the house, and I'd fall asleep to his practicing Chopin and Brahms every night. So I just grew up thinking people played instruments. That was just a normal thing you did. So I started
Right.
off with piano, and then I went to summer camp when I was a kid, and the counselors had guitars, and we sang stuff. We sang Bob Dylan, Simon Garfunkel, and I just thought that was cool, and so I asked for a guitar when I was 12 for Christmas, and got one. And the rest is history. I just started playing all the songs that I really loved. And at a certain point, my grandmother, who was in a mandolin club in college, found this old Gibson mandolin in her closet. And she said, here, you can have this. Actually, she found two, these really beautiful old Gibson mandos. And so that's how I started learning the mandolin. And then at some point, I got a harmonica because I was a Dylan fan. And I just started collecting instruments, and I found that when you learn one instrument with fret and strings, it's not that difficult to learn another one. So that's pretty much what I have, is a big pile of instruments at this point.
Yeah.
And I started playing in bands, actually in high school, really.
Okay.
And there was this little club about a mile from our house. It was called the Red Fox Inn. I grew up in Bethesda, Maryland. And this was an amazing little club. And every Monday night, they would have an open mic. But it was, I don't know how to describe it. It was all really great musicians. And it took me a while to get up my nerve to play. I was only about 15 when I started playing there. Really awesome people who would play, old blues songs and a cappella gospel songs and bluegrass, and it was a pretty folky orientation. And I just learned so much from these people who would get up every Monday night. So my parents would drop me and a friend off on Mondays, and we'd go play that thing. And pretty soon I met other musicians and started playing in bands. And when I was 17, I moved here to Austin and went to University of Texas and met a whole bunch of musicians down here. I mean, Austin is famous for great musicians. So that's really how I pretty much got started.
Wow. It seems like becoming a musician is kind of it seems like it's an organic process, right? Until you get to a point where it becomes more commercial. But like the beginning of it feels probably more just kind of natural, and it evolves, right? Is that how it was for you?
Yeah, I think that's true. It's funny to say becoming a musician, because I feel like in a lot of ways you're just born that way. And then you discover that you are one.
Yeah.
And you just have to find out what kind you are and how you're going to create yourself.
Yeah.
But it is interesting when you say at a certain point you become more commercial. I think at a certain point you have to decide, is this going to be my way of life? Is this how I'm going to make a living? And then you have to get creative about how you do that.
Right.
And for most musicians I know, that means piecing together a lot of different aspects of being a musician. You know, you can go out on the road and you can play, or you can become a studio engineer, producer, you can become a teacher. You know, there's so many different things, or you can do all of those.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say your dad was a pianist. My mom is too. And so I grew up kind of like you, falling asleep or just around the house listening to my mom practice all the time. So, but she gave lessons, so that was kind of her primary thing that she did to earn a living, was by giving lessons and
so do you
but it
play?
was such a no. I do not play piano. I did learn, and I feel pretty proud about this. I learned that Indian song, the dun 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 dun. Are you familiar with that one?
That's cool.
Yeah. So I learned that, and I became really accomplished at playing that song. I have different variations of that I can do, but that's about it. But I do play guitar. So I play guitar and sing and do some of that stuff, and I've primarily used that like in church settings, you know, and so. But I'm not like you. You're somebody that has mastered like this instrument in a way that I can only dream about. I'm a strummer, you know, like I'm just a very basic guitar player. But I've actually been thinking about that lately, and there's something about it that I just wasn't as passionate about playing that instrument as you obviously have been. Like, it takes a certain level of commitment, and if you don't really have it, you can kind of be a hack like me. But to go from hack like me to really skilled at a craft like you are, that takes a lot of work.
It does take a lot of work, I have to admit. It really does. And I remember when I was a kid, I read this Beatles book. I can't remember who the author was, but it made such a big impression on me because I remember reading about George Harrison. When he was a kid, he would practice until his fingers bled. And I thought, wow, really? How can that happen? But I remember one time when I was in high school, I was practicing, and I looked down at my fingers, and they were bleeding, and I was like, okay, I'm in the club. I'm a professional musician now.
I finally did it.
I finally did it. I crossed the threshold. But I'm definitely a lifer, for sure. There is something about... It's not even like you make a commitment as if you have this job and you're committing to a job. It's hard to explain. It's almost like you're just allowing yourself or just receiving this thing that you were born with and just letting it happen and doing all the things that you have to do to be good at it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about that, and I think it's true. We are all kind of born with, obviously, our personalities, and there's just things about us that are kind of in our fabric, right? It's like what we're made of. But I don't think necessarily everybody pursues those things. You know, it's like, I think we get a choice, don't we, of whether or not we actually pursue that thing that may come naturally to us. I think people sometimes resist that urge because they don't feel it's like the practical thing to do, or it may not line up with other goals in their life. And so I still think it's kind of rare when somebody pursues something that's kind of woven into them.
Yeah.
Especially in our world, Jane. Like, right? Like, becoming a musician is not the practical thing to do.
That's for sure. And
Yeah.
so I think you're exactly right that just because you have that skill or that talent, that natural talent, it doesn't mean you're going to go through all the things you have to do to actually create that life. Because, I mean, it is true that I believe that you're born with sort of a raw talent, but then you have to hone it, and that does take a lot of work. And then you have to be committed to the lifestyle, which is, it's very uncertain. Every day is different. It's not just every year or every month or every week. Every single day is different, and you don't exactly know what that day is going to look like. Even now, where my life is fairly routine for a musician because I create these compositions, I don't know which ones are going to be a success, which ones are going to be used. If I'm putting work into something that will never see the light of day, you know what I mean? So, as a musician on the road, it's even more so. Because you travel to all these towns and you don't know who's going to show up for your gig, and you don't know if you're going to be in good form that night, and there's just so much uncertainty. It's not like working for a company where you get a steady paycheck, which is something I've also done from time to time.
Right.
It's really, really different. So you have to be willing to put up with the risk.
Yeah. Let's dive down that just a little bit. So I think of musicians kind of maybe in a similar way that I would think of athletes. They talk about the likelihood of a high school athlete becoming a collegiate athlete, and then that collegiate athlete becoming a professional athlete. And the odds of that high school athlete becoming a professional athlete are just very, very slim, right? There's just a small percentage of people that make it to that level. And, when we think of the music industry, we think of Aerosmith, the Beatles, Beyonce, like those are the people that are kind of like commercially speaking at the highest level. And there's all kinds of people like you just talked about doing other things within the music industry. But if you don't make it at that really like super elite level, whatever you want to call that, it can be difficult, right? Like there is like some difficulties, and like you were talking about, there aren't any guarantees, in that lifestyle. So what's that been like for you?
That's right. I totally agree with that. And I think that even when you reach the mega level, it's still an incredibly difficult job, because just like an athlete, you're using your body for your work, and you have to take such good care of it. And if anything goes wrong, you can't do your work. So I once went to a performance of Beyonce, and I was just blown away at what she does with her body while she's singing. What everybody does. It's just an incredible... I wonder how many people think about that when they watch these people. They're just so skilled, and so much work has gone into every performance. It's incredible. So even though financially they don't have a risk, just physically and emotionally, it's still a pretty risky job. But for somebody like me, I would say as a singer-songwriter, I made a living. That was my goal to begin with, to be able to make a living every year.
Right.
And so my level I would describe as somebody who had, record deals, an agent, my own little section in Tower Records, which shows you how long ago that was. And the rest was, I just spent a lot of time on the road and wrote songs, put out albums, that kind of thing. And I was just thrilled, really thrilled to do it. I would say I was on the road mostly in my 20s and 30s. And I got to a point about mid-30s where, first of all, I wanted to have kids, and I knew the time clock was running. And second of all, I thought to myself, this really is a physically demanding job, and I'm not sure I want to be doing this when I'm 40.
Right.
So I had to think about, well, what would I want to do where I could still make a living? And I had a couple of kids, and during that time, after I stayed home with them for a number of years, I went into the real world and had a few different jobs in offices, which I found really interesting and really different. And when I came out of that lifestyle, after my kids were older, I became a producer. And that was really satisfying work, and a teacher. So really different lifestyle, but really rewarding in its own way. And I have to say, it felt a little less risky, just sort of career-wise, than being a musician on the road.
Are you digging our theme music? Well, we dig it too. You can check out more Jane Gillman music at her website, janegillman.com. Or you can download some of her music to your playlist on iTunes. That's Gillman. So what was that experience like, being a musician on the road? Like, if you could give me some kind of high-level overview of what that was like.
I would love to have a little discussion with people who did this at that age, just to see what everybody's experience was. But for me, because
you think of you think of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That's the thing that you think of.
Yeah, you do.
The road lifestyle.
You do, but I think first of all, that's more a male thing. Can I just say? Okay. I mean, there's always Janis Joplins and stuff, but
sure.
And I also think it's more of a rock and roll thing. Where in folk, what happens is, I'll just tell you. First of all, I would pack up my Honda with all my instruments and my records and all that stuff. And this is when I first started. I had LPs, so they took up a lot of room. And I had booked everything. At that point, I was my own agent also, which is a whole nother thing. You're cold calling all these people all over the country, and you're trying to string together gigs so that you're not in Arizona one day and Montana the next. So you have to get kind of good at that. So I would embark on these tours, and to me it was a thrill, because I loved seeing the country. And in those days, I was mostly in the U.S. and Canada. And everything was an adventure. Just driving and going to all these places. And I would go out of my way to go to good restaurants that I'd heard about. And it was just a travel adventure on the one hand. And then you would show up at the club after being kind of lonely. I'd be driving by myself for all these hours. And then you'd show up at the club. And there'd be a million people there to talk to, and there'd be audience people to talk to. So it went from extreme introvert to extreme extrovert. And, the minute you arrived at the club or wherever, you would switch into a different mode. But what I was going to tell you is the folk scene, at least when I was doing it, was operated by a lot of volunteers. And you would play churches, and especially Unitarian churches. There's a whole there's a whole circuit of folk societies that put concerts on at churches, and I don't even remember all the places I played. Just really interesting venues that they would be able to use pretty much for free, or just at low cost. And for those kind of situations, you would end up staying at somebody's house. and they would often cook for you, and you'd get a nice bed, and you'd meet these people. So, now house concerts are a big thing, so people perform in people's houses. So, at any rate, there's sort of a whole network out there that supports folk music. That's a world of its own. It's an interesting thing to tap into. So, between my love of travel and my love of meeting characters all over the country, I really enjoyed being on the road. Of course, sometimes you do have to drive, maybe not from Arizona to Montana, but you have long drives, and you're not your best when you get up on stage. So it can be a little tricky.
Yeah.
But for people in their 20s and 30s, as long as you're making a living and you're not losing money, it's a really exciting lifestyle.
Yeah. So I'm just looking here on iTunes, and I know you probably have other work that isn't on iTunes, but I mean it's pretty. Your first album was in 1980. Is that right?
I don't know who came up with that.
Okay.
That info is circulating on the internet, and I don't know who put that out there. But the first album was actually in '86, and that was Pick It Up. And then the self-titled album, Jane Gillman, the one that people often say is 1980, was actually 1990.
1990.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's when I was doing the most of my traveling was like late '80s to the mid '90s.
Right. Because, I mean, you look like a kid on the Pick It Up. You look like you're 16. In that, and you look like a young woman on the other one that says 1980. So it makes sense that.
That's right. I should try to figure out how to correct that one of these days, but.
Yeah. So, and then there's List of Wishes too. I see that one, and then you have this. Then you have a single. And I can't even pronounce that word. I would feel like I mess it up. What's the single that you have out?
Are you talking about Piscean Dreams?
Piscean. Yeah, Piscean Dreams.
But there's one that came after the self-titled album.
Okay.
That's called Ways to Fly, and that was done with Darcy DeVille. My friend Darcy and I became singing partners for 3 years. And this was from 92 to 95. And that was a little more fun than traveling as a solo. For one thing, I had somebody to chat with in the car. But it's just, much more fun to be playing with other people than by myself. I never really intended to be a solo singer-songwriter. It just kind of happened.
Right. So do you have a favorite song? I would think you do, but do you have a favorite song that you wrote that... just means something special to you?
Oh boy, I don't know. I'd have to think about that for a while. Every time you write a song as a songwriter, you think, oh, I really like this one. This is a good one. But that's sort of the rush of having finished a song. It doesn't necessarily mean it's such a great one. But I would have to look back and think, what's a really special one? I'm not sure, to tell you the truth. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's fine. I just didn't know if you had like a song that just like, man, that one just kind of stands out to me as special for...
There's some that are maybe not what I think are just like structurally the greatest song, but that have a special meaning to me. So there's one on Piscean Dreams called Colliston, and that's the name of a little town in Scotland.
Okay.
I did a tour there in 2007 and played, talk about interesting venues. This was just a little, almost community center on the top of a hill in the way eastern part of Scotland, kind of northeastern part, and in a very small town. And everybody in the town shows up for a concert, so the place was absolutely packed. And the guy who was in charge of the concert series was our drummer for the night. And they served beer there, and they were trying out a new brew, and they didn't realize that the alcohol content was about twice as much as what their normal beer is. So we had the drummer was a little off time here and there, but it was just a remarkable night. It was so great. The people were so awesome. I could understand only about half of what they said because their Scottish brogues were so strong. But that song is sort of I don't know how to explain it exactly, but it was what I was thinking about as I was driving to this little town. So that
Wow.
one has a special meaning to me.
I'll have to listen to it. I see it here, so I'll have to check it out when we're done today. But yeah. So do you find that more enjoyable than when everything is very orchestrated and perfect? And it's kind of just like everything comes together in this way musically that you would want it to, or do you just kind of enjoy these moments where maybe the music isn't perfect, but the atmosphere is just kind of fun and nothing is too serious? Like, do you prefer one over the other?
Well, that's a good question. I think when the atmosphere is right, the music feels perfect. And perfect doesn't mean that all the notes are exactly right. It means that you've created something, a sum that's bigger than the parts. When you're collaborating with people, to me, that's the ultimate. That's the ultimate thing that happens as a musician, when you collaborate with people who you admire and who you connect with. And there's nothing like that. And so when you get that feeling of collaboration, then whatever happens from that feels perfect, whether it is or whether it's orchestrated or all that kind of stuff.
Right.
It's really
I know for me,
the feeling that's so fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. I know for me, the last thing that I did, like in front of a group of people, the person that I was doing this with, she's more analytical than I am. That'd probably be the way to put it. But so she was not comfortable, and she wanted to just kind of practice and it got to the point where I practiced myself out of feeling comfortable, and it put pressure on me that I probably didn't need to feel, but then I felt a lot of pressure to be kind of perfect, And then once that took place, my anxiety took over, and I was not myself any longer. I was just kind of some guy that was trying to not make a mistake instead of just having fun, instead of just having fun in the moment. And so I've just noticed for me, that's a trigger that'll kind of trigger anxiety. But if I can just go somewhere and just start playing and singing with people, then it feels totally different. It's a totally different experience.
I totally relate to that. I was in a band for a while, and when I came to my first rehearsal, they said, we have a couple rules in this band, and one is you can't make a mistake. So, that's impossible.
Yeah.
In fact, that's how you learn, really, as a musician, is by making mistakes.
Yeah.
So I agree with that. I feel like, I agree with that to a certain point, but as a professional musician, you do have to get to a point where you do have to be, I don't know if analytical is quite the right word, but you have to be able to see the big picture.
Sure.
And know all the moving parts and how they fit together. Right.
Yeah. I'm not trying to advocate for not practicing. I'm not advocating for that.
I know what you mean, where, especially if you have really different kinds of personalities, you can definitely stress each other out.
Yeah.
When you're collaborating. So that's a real trick, is to find people who are simpatico and really great collaborators. And as a producer, as a record producer, that's one of the big jobs, because it isn't just a musical job where as a producer, you're basically a artistic director of an album. And so you decide, you take all these songs, these raw songs, and you decide, okay, what are we going to do with this? What instruments are we going to put on here? What arrangement are we going to do? And who's going to play the instruments? So it's like a movie. You're like a movie director, and you're putting all the characters together, and you're creating all these scenes out of each song.
Yeah.
And so you have to have that. I mean, I kind of feel like the big skill is almost, it's not just artistic. You have to be a little bit of a therapist and decide who's going to play well together and what's going to make the artist comfortable that you're working with. So finding collaborators who work well together is a big part of it. And people who don't stress each other out, you know?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's just time, right? Like, the more time you spend together, the easier it becomes to... because I've played with other people that are more analytical, so that's a word I used, but they go into the details more than I do. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm more of a just kind of from the cuff kind of guy. But when I play with somebody who really wants to dig into the details, I've found that just a little bit of time kind of helps it all come together and for you to feel more comfortable with it.
That's for sure. But you know, when you're producing an album, oftentimes you have people walk right into the studio, sit down, play the song. They've never heard the song before. They're just playing from a chord chart. And playing with people maybe they've never played before and needing to sound like a band.
Right.
So as both an artist who had my albums produced and as a producer who's producing other people's albums, that's been my experience, where you have to very quickly create a collaborative feeling among all these people and make it sound as if they've been playing together for a long time, even though they just may have met each other 5 minutes ago.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You think it like going out and, you know, sharing a meal together and maybe a beer would help with that process before you jumped into the studio. Yeah. Like maybe that would be the way to go about it.
That would be really nice. But if you think about it, the people who come play on your albums, they're reporting for work. They're coming to work.
Yeah, I know.
Usually the beer and the meal comes afterwards.
That's after the fact, huh? Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. It's because music is like an emotional thing. It's not. It's different than going to work. Even if it is going to work, in other people, the people that listen to the music, it evokes an emotion. And so you would like to think that the people doing the music too, especially like in bands, there's kind of this connectedness that happens in the making of the music, but that's not necessarily the case, right? Like, so that can't always be the case, but sometimes it is. So, you know, it's just interesting to think about something that...
well, that's one of the real challenges, I think, of being an artist, a musical artist, at least. That's what I'm familiar with, is that it does come from such a passionate, emotional place. Yet, in order to be able to package, so to speak, and present that emotion, you have to enlist a different skill set than just blah, you know, playing guitar and creating this emotion. Then you have to know how to present it. You have to know how to get up on stage, and you have to know something about sound, and you have to know how you're going to present yourself, and when you're first starting out, how to book the gig, and how to do contracts. And, you know, it's a real split personality. You're the artist on one side, and you're the business person on the other side.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of musicians who really don't like the business aspect of it. It's a necessary evil.
Yeah, yeah. I would think it would be challenging as far as like, so if I, let's say I wrote a song and I want to perform this song, I'm trying to create the album, and maybe it's something that I feel very connected to, and there's just a lot of myself tied up into this song, and so I'm coming at it from like an emotional place, and then I may have other musicians coming at it from just a very pragmatic, like, this is my job, let's get it done. Is that hard to combine those things? I would imagine that a lot of frustration could take place in that process.
I think that's true. I think especially when you're first starting out, that there are a lot of people who think, yeah, I want to be a musician. I just want to be able to play my guitar all the time. And they don't consider what you're talking about, that there is all this pragmatic business stuff that you just have to take care of. Otherwise, you won't be able to sustain yourself. You won't be able to actually make a living.
Yeah. Yeah.
So...
Did you... Go ahead, sorry.
Well, I'm just agreeing with you. I think that's
okay.
That causes some problems. Because some people are just more oriented toward the business side of things. I actually kind of enjoy it personally.
Right.
And there's so much music business out there to figure out and understand. It's complicated. So if you're not good at it, it's good to have somebody represent you who is good at it.
Right. Did you ever watch the documentary on, I think it's on Tom Petty, where he was talking about, and I don't know the name of the documentary off the top of my head, but he was talking about when they toured with Bob Dylan. Have you ever seen that?
I haven't, but people have told me about it. It's supposed to be great.
Yeah, it was really good. But he was just talking about the fact that when you tour with Bob Dylan, when you get, and this was live, so this wasn't like recording in the studio, but you never knew what key he may start a song in, so you would just have to watch him and listen for where he started, and then you would have to so he said, like, every time you played that song, it could be different. You never knew exactly what was going to happen.
I know, isn't that amazing? It's incredible that Bob Dylan could even do that.
I know, that is just unreal. And it's also amazing that Tom Petty and his band could pick up, and he said they became a lot better musicians through that process. So
yeah, that's amazing. Well, at least it wasn't boring.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So speaking of that, not specifically, but who's one of your favorite artists? So who do you listen to?
Well, when I was first starting, Bob Dylan was a big influence, of course. That's why I got the idea of playing guitar and harmonica together. I like a lot of indie folk, and I like indie stuff. Indie folk, indie rock. I like kind of the new crop of singer-songwriters, and I guess one of my favorite bands will always be NRBQ.
NRBQ. I've never heard of them.
They're a rock band. I don't even think they're together anymore, but a bunch of amazing creative guys. You should check them out. And of course the Beatles were always the number one influence. Yeah. But I try to listen to all kinds of stuff. The radio was probably my biggest musical influence as a kid. So I try to just keep up with stuff and see what's on the radio.
Yeah. So who are you listening to right now? So what's got your attention right now?
Let's see, who does have my attention right now? It's funny because a long time ago you'd buy an album and you'd listen to it a billion times, but now you're on Spotify and you just go with the flow, and half the time you don't even know who pops up. It's just sort of a different thing. So So I don't have a good answer for you.
Okay, that's all right.
Unfortunately.
It is different, yeah, if you listen to it in that way. I used to listen to Pandora, and you would just select an artist, and then it would pick other artists like that artist.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was great for finding new artists that you do really like. On Apple, which is what I use primarily anymore, I have my artists and I just listen to their stuff, so I don't find as many new artists that way. But yeah. One of my favorite people, I really like Brandi Carlile.
Oh yeah, I like her too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think I kind of started liking her before she was like really big, but she's kind of become a really big thing recently.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I really enjoy her music. But I'm like you. I have some kind of off the beaten path artists that I really enjoy, and another one. Have you ever heard of Bandcamp?
I
you ever
have.
heard of that?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You can find a lot of great music on Bandcamp too. That's kind of cool. So.
Yeah, that's cool. I sort of explore SoundCloud.
Okay, yeah.
I haven't been on Bandcamp.
Yeah. Actually, how I found Bandcamp was my friend Joshua. He and I were working on Vacation Bible School, and he found this guy that takes Bible verses and puts them to music for kids.
Oh,
and he's from Des Moines, and they have actions and dancing and all this stuff, but they're just basically straight up Bible verses, and he has like videos. And so this guy was on Bandcamp, and we used it for VBS, and I ended up using it for other programs for kids that we did and stuff, and that's how I kind of started to explore Bandcamp. But I found this other group from like Nashville, and they're all like bluegrass, folky type people, but they do these really cool excerpts of scripture, all to music. So they'll basically take it right out of the Bible, and they just put it to music. But they take like whole sections of scripture, and so there's like Romans, and it's really just kind of this neat
That's
group.
Amazing.
And so it is amazing. That's actually really hard. You think about the work that goes into that, and to make
just trying to picture that, like how they create verses with meter and stuff, and how they and so then they make a bluegrass tune out of that. Yeah,
basically it's bluegrassy, and it's just a lot of fun.
That's incredible.
It's a lot of fun, but yeah, it is cool.
Well, I guess it's sort of like people who take poetry and put music to it. That a lot of people do.
Hey guys, it's Seth. Some of you might be wondering, I wish there was a way to follow these guys and what they're up to. Well, I don't know if you heard about a little thing called the internet. That's right. If you check us out at twitter.com/WeWillJourney1, you'll be able to keep updated on what we're up to and maybe some future interviews or projects we're working on. Catch yous later.
Well, something that I've thought a lot about is the Psalms, right? So a lot of the Psalms were actually songs. And so, like historically, church prior to hymns sang psalms, right? But we've kind of lost that in our culture today, and we've gone from hymns to worship music. So we've progressed like to another thing, and so these psalms that used to be songs, I don't like have a framework for that in my mind. What did that sound like, or what did that used to be like? And so it's interesting when people do take them. And I found other musicians that will take psalms now and they kind of make them modern and more worship song-ish. So, but it's interesting to think about that, how we just kind of evolve, and we move away from certain things into other things, but then you kind of lose what used to exist on a very large scale, right? Like that just used to be, yeah.
It would
Yeah.
be really interesting to know how all those psalms sounded as songs.
I know it would be. I'd be really interested in that too.
But
Just
I
to,
think
to
that
know what that.
I think that taking passages from the Bible and creating songs from them would be tricky. Because when I teach songwriting, one of the things that I teach is how different prose and poetry are from song verses. You know, think about "She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah." It's just a whole different. It's a whole different structure and a whole. You know, when you're writing to music, it just puts out a whole different kind of words than if you're not writing to music and you're just writing poetry or verse. So I would think that'd be a lot harder to put music.
Are you still recording, by the way, Jane? I don't want to interrupt you, but
Oh yeah. I timed
Okay.
out. I timed out, so I'm on track 3 or something.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. So I just want to make sure you're still going. But yeah, I know. It's like, it is interesting. You're right. Because when you're writing a song, you can kind of think of how you want it to sound. But when you're taking something that already exists and trying to be true to that, you have to create a sound that works within that framework, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's
And
probably
a
harder
lot of
to
times
do.
when you read song lyrics, if you read them without knowing what the music is, they might not even seem that great as poetry. But then when you hear them with the music, all of a sudden it becomes sound poetry. It's a whole different kind of poetry.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, I know. You do look at lyrics sometimes and you're like,
You're like, what?
how did this
Especially
how
pop
did this get to
songs.
be anything?
I know.
Oh, yeah.
But then you hear it with the music and you hear it with the voice, and then you feel the emotional impact of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what sets apart, like you referenced Bob Dylan and, I think of like Johnny Cash, people that could tell a story and it just felt very cohesive. And it didn't feel like commercial in any way. Typically, I would say maybe Johnny Cash maybe has a few songs that maybe are a little more commercial, but they typically tell a complete story.
So here's a question. I have a question for you. So when you say commercial, what do you think of?
When I say it, so I think of just something meant to sell, right? I think there's a difference between songs that are meant to be popular and songs that just kind of come from somebody's heart, Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm really intrigued with that whole idea because I've been kind of studying country music for a long time and its evolution, and just listening to the country songs that are popular now, there's actually a really wide range of music that's called country these days. It can be anything from hick hop to what's called traditional country, like somebody like Luke Combs. And my whole feeling about commercial music has really evolved, and I'm in awe of it now. I actually think that some of the smartest songwriters are in Nashville writing country music. Some of the turns of phrase and the succinctness of the lyrics is amazing. Sometimes it sounds like it's really easy to write because the themes are kind of repetitive, my truck and my beer and all that stuff. But the ideas, the hooks, and the use of words and the little internal rhymes that are put in there are actually really hard to create.
Yeah.
And what they're creating overall is an emotion. When you turn on those songs, you can't help but feeling sentimental or, whatever, nostalgic. You definitely get an emotional feeling when you listen to those songs. And I think that's a real skill, to be able to write a song that a million zillion people want to listen to and buy.
Right. Right.
I don't know. I've come to really just admire that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always have a way, Jane, of stepping into a ton of landmines, with people when I use terminology. So I always end up having to learn how to rephrase things.
You know what, though? I think a lot of people agree with you. And I think I used to think that, too. But
yeah. But for instance, you're talking about, like, the genre of country music. So, Vince Gill has that Go Rest High on a Mountain, which was written about his brother that died, if I remember right. So that's like a deeply emotional song for Vince Gill. And it's a beautiful song, and it, I think it works like on every level that it could work on, it works,
Yeah.
And then, and you compare that to a song like Honky Tonk Badonky Donk, right? Am I thinking of the right one? Right? Like, and I know that the intent of the song is totally different, right? I know that you can't compare them on, like, what was the obviously the one song is deeply personal and the other one's just kind of meant to be fun.
Yeah.
Right? But at the same time, you know what I mean? Like, one feels very intimate where the other one just feels more commercialized, right? It's just meant to sell. It's meant to, be played at parties and, like, everybody makes a buck off the deal. It's not that serious. I mean, does that make sense? What I'm saying there? There's like,
it does, and I agree with you. And I think that there's a whole bunch of stuff in between those two things.
Right.
Where
right.
songwriters, in Nashville, songwriting is a real business where you show up at 1 p.m. and you write for an hour with such and such, and then at 3 o'clock you've got a meeting with this person to write with this person, and of course the whole goal is to write a hit.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's so much skill that really goes into writing that hit, and the people who write them have been honing their craft for years.
Yeah.
And to me, if you can combine the real feeling of a Vince Gill song, the real trick is to combine an authentic emotion with just the right turn of phrase so that other people listening can connect to it and understand it. That's the real trick to songwriting. I saw a really nice interview with Joni Mitchell the other day, and she was saying anybody can sit at home and write about themselves. But the real trick is to be able to write something that comes from within you that is understood by so many other people.
Yeah.
And that to me is sort of the basis of commercial writing. You're trying to appeal to other people's emotions. I think that's true of all art.
Yeah.
When you're painting a painting, you want it to be, you probably want it to be hung up somewhere, and to have somebody come along and say, oh, wow, I can really relate to that. That's beautiful. I would love to have that in my house.
Right. Right. So I think what you're saying there is, like, if it only makes sense to you, then you probably haven't really achieved what you wanted to achieve. Is that
maybe? Unless that's just all
of,
you want to do is you want to sit at home and write some songs. But if you want to go out there, and once you're receiving money for your art, you are a commercial artist. You know what I mean?
Right.
You've stepped into that other world. You've become commercial. And so commercial is a funny word because if you want to sustain yourself as an artist, people have to buy your art. So in that way, you do become commercial. I think what becomes tricky is when people try to chase after what they think other people want. And that becomes their sole motivation. And they lose the emotional connection to what they're doing.
It makes me think of that movie, we're on country here, but Pure Country with George Strait. Where he kind of becomes that guy that, his agent, or whoever, the record company or whatever, they want him to become that guy. and he kind of loses himself in the process. I know that's a super cheesy reference.
Yeah, no, but that's so true. I think that's the whole crazy dilemma of being an artist is you want to make your art and you want to be able to sustain yourself. Those two different aspects of being an artist. The art and the money.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think a lot of people just kind of lose themselves in trying to maintain something so they find some success on at some point in time, and then it just becomes about maintaining that level of success so they can maintain the lifestyle? Do you think a lot of people fall into that?
I think there's a whole spectrum, and I think probably the reason so many artists, well, especially musicians, are substance abusers is because it is such a dilemma, and you are the focus. You're under the microscope. There's so much pressure. I think the pressure really increases the more rich and famous you become. And so this thing that started out as your pure passion becomes a little problematic.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you're on stage playing for thousands of people doing exactly what you want to be doing. I think that when you're on stage playing for that couple of hours, you're in nirvana. And then the rest of the time you have to deal with the business aspect of it.
Right. So like the stage is kind of where you go to get away from the realities of the world, and then once you're off stage, you're dealing with all the reality of what you've kind of helped build, right?
Yeah, well, when you're on stage, that's the whole reason that you've been doing all this. That's the whole reason for it all. You're playing with, well, if you're in a band, you're playing with other people, you've got the crowd, there's this energy that goes back and forth. It's what it's all about. Yeah. But it's funny how little time that is compared to the whole rest of everything you have to do.
Right, yeah.
I used to think about that as a solo performer a lot. It's like, okay, I spent all this time booking all these gigs, like just hours getting this tour together. And then I got my car all set and my travel arrangements all set. And got everything kind of mapped out. And now I'm going to drive for 8 hours. Like, you're basically being paid to be a driver. And then you show up for your gig, which in many cases is just a couple hours, sometimes even an hour sometimes 20 minutes if you're just opening for somebody. And then that's it. And then you go on to the next place. So the thing that you really love to do is a very small part of the whole package.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned something that I found interesting earlier. So I was just thinking this morning, I found something that's called a monk manual, and it's supposed to be like a planner. And but what it does is it kind of incorporates like some spiritual elements of your life into your daily planner. So it kind of at least gives you space to reflect on things, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was just thinking about the fact that, one of the parts of it says, I am grateful for, and then it gives you things to write down that you're grateful for. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of people say, well, I'm just grateful that Jesus saved me. And, you're in the South, Jane, you probably hear that kind of thing all the time, I'm guessing, maybe. Because the South is just kind of culturally religious, right? I mean, is that how you've experienced it, kind of a cultural, religious place? And so they'll say, Jesus saved me from hell, or, whatever it is that they say. I don't know how they put it, but, but I was just thinking about that statement this morning a little bit before you and I started talking. And I thought, what am I really thankful for? If Jesus saved me, what am I really most thankful for about what did he save me from? And so I just spent just a little time this morning thinking about that. Like, what aspect of him saving me am I actually thankful for? You know, instead of just throwing out like some cliche type thing in my mind. And I don't use that term very often just because I try to stay away from some of those little Christian cliche type things that people like to throw out there a bunch. But I thought, man, I'm just glad that he saved me from the selfishness that I'm really prone to. Like, if it wasn't for Jesus and just reading through scripture and really starting to understand what he was trying to teach, I would just be totally self-absorbed. Like that's naturally who I am. I'm just a self-absorbed person. Like, I'm going to seek to satisfy and gratify myself first. And I'm 43 now, Jane, and little by little, he's been teaching me over years, probably 20 some years, that I started taking this serious, how to be a little less selfish. And I'm not saying I'm not, you know, but I see that in so many things, you know, where the focus kind of becomes us, right? So, whether we're talking about professional athletes or musicians or actors and actresses or doctors, you know, I mean, you name it, right? Like, there's so many things in our world today that really just draw us into ourselves, and the focus kind of becomes all about us. And, you know, and then there's like what you were just alluding to there, this pressure of trying to find ways to cope with that then. You know, you were talking about drugs and alcohol kind of becoming like this escape. But I think one of the big things that our culture and society struggles with is just this self-focus. I mean, do you agree with that in any way, or
I totally
or what do you
agree. I think about that a lot, and I also really thought about that a lot when I stopped being on the road and stopped being a singer-songwriter, and I had children. So pre-children, my whole life was, I'm going to write songs about myself and get up on stage and present these songs about myself by talking about myself, and then people are going to clap for me. That's my job.
Right?
And I can't tell you how different it is to go from being someone who's moving all the time, being the center of attention for their job, being among people all over the country, and then going from that to complete stillness and having your focus be children, being people other than yourself who are relying on you for their survival. It's about as different as you can get.
Yeah.
And I remember right before I had kids, I was playing at a folk festival in Vancouver, and the guy who was in charge of the festival saw that I was pregnant, and he said, having children is the most amazing thing ever because it broadens your emotional landscape. And I just always think about that. I love that. I've thought about that for years, how your emotional landscape is broadened. And I couldn't agree with that more. And that's one thing that I'm really grateful for, is having my kids, because I feel like I became a really different person.
Yeah.
And I feel like since then, I've been so much more service-oriented. And I actually lost, I mean, honestly, that's one reason why I lost interest in being a singer-songwriter, is because I feel like it is very self-focused. Now, that's just my experience of it. For a lot of people, being a singer-songwriter is a service, because it provides other people with songs that they love and that they can relate to and that are a big part of their lives. So I don't want to say that, paint with a broad stroke and say, oh, well, if you're a singer-songwriter, you're just self-focused. But for me, that was my experience. And after I stopped doing that, I produced other people's albums. I became a teacher. And now I'm providing music for TV shows, you know, stuff like that. Like, your orientation just changes. And I also think that's just part of wisdom and getting older, that you become less self-focused.
Yeah.
But I like your...
For some people, not everybody, Jane.
Well, that's true. But I also like your workbook where you have a reminder every day to write down what you're grateful for.
Yeah.
I do that a lot too.
Yeah.
I think that just sort of gives you a big picture view of the world and your place in it.
Yeah. So did you find that then when you were on the road touring and it was more focused on you, like emotionally, was that difficult in some ways? Did that cause you to turn to some things that, kind of helped you escape from that in some sense?
I wouldn't say, I was never a big fan of substances, but I definitely started yoga on the road.
Okay.
I needed things to make me more centered because I found that the busier I got, and the more physically demanding it is, the harder it became. It really helped me to get a singing partner, to tell you the truth. That was just really fun to have somebody else in the car to chat with.
Yeah.
And to have somebody to play with and to have somebody to share the experience with, just the traveling part. It's just so much more fun.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I could definitely see that.
Yeah, there's definitely a stress. Being on the road is pretty stressful, especially by yourself. I'm always amazed that nothing bad ever happened. When I think of all the rest areas I ever slept in. And
oh, yeah. Yeah. It's an unsafe world. Like, I can imagine your parents at the time maybe were like, sweetheart, I don't know.
The amazing thing is they never said anything like, where are you going to stay? Who are you staying with? They never did that. They just sort of trusted that I knew what I was doing. I don't know why.
Yeah. I think about my own childhood and all the things that I just was kind of allowed to do, and I think I would never ever let my kids do that now. I would be like mortified.
Yeah, I'm kind of amazed that my parents never said get a real job.
Yeah. Well, Jane, I don't want to take up more of your time. We're already like at an hour and 10 minutes, but I just feel too like maybe we're just scratching the surface of some really interesting things to talk about. But so maybe we can do this again if you're cool with that. But I really appreciate your time. It was a lot of fun talking.
Well, it's been great to talk with you too, Tyler. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we've never actually done this. As I was thinking about it, I'm like, oh, we've only emailed. We've never actually talked. And
I know.
And so it's cool to actually get to hear, about your life a little bit and just kind of what that's entailed. And yeah.
Well, I'm really glad that you went on to Air Gigs and you found me. And you asked me to do. I'm honored.
Yeah.
That you used my music on your show. I really appreciate that, and it's a beautiful tune that I've always loved.
Yeah.
So it's nice to be able to play that again.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate it too, and maybe we'll have you do some other things as we can afford it. So
anytime.
Unfortunately,
really
with
fun.
me and Seth, like we would be, the struggling musician in the world.
That's all right. That's okay. It isn't all about the money. Sometimes it's just about the fun.
Thank you for listening to my dad and Seth today. Please listen next week for more. Dad, do I have to say this?
Just read what I wrote.
Fine. Please listen next week for more highly intellectual conversation.
Very good. Very good.
And I'm made by hand. I've got a mother, a sister, and a brother who have gone see them, good Lord, over on that distant shore. As I go down to that river of Jordan, just to bathe my weary soul. If I could just touch the hem of his garment, good Lord, I believe it would make me whole. When I'm dead, laying in my coffin, all my friends all gather round. They can say, I'm just sleeping, good Lord, a sweet peace I have found.